Administration. The special counsel and the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York have just released information about the prosecution of former Trump attorney Michael Cohen and the sentencing recommendations they give. And we await similar data about former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort. This after former FBI Director James Comey testified in a closed-door congressional hearing this afternoon about alleged anti-Trump bias in the Justice Department. We start off this evening with Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge on Capitol Hill, digesting all of this. Good evening, Catherine.
That's right, Brett, and good evening. Within the last hour, we've had those two key filings in the Cohen case, one from the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, the other for the special counsel. The recommendation for Cohen is significant jail time, about 4 years, and a fine of $500,000. One of the filings from the special counsel does give us an indication of the kind of information Cohen offered on Russia. And that section of the filing reads in part, Cohen provided the SCO, the special counsel office, with useful information concerning certain discrete Russia-related matters, core to its investigation, that he obtained by virtue of his regular contact with company executives during the campaign. Cohen provided relevant and useful information concerning his contacts with persons connected to the White House during the 2017 and 2018 time period. Meantime, here on Capitol Hill, a short time ago, the former FBI Director James Comey wrapped up 6 hours of testimony, and at that point, he was ready to speak to reporters.
When you read the transcript, you will see that we're talking again about Hillary Clinton's emails, for heaven's sake, so I'm not sure we need to do this at all. But I'm trying to respect the institution and to answer questions in a respectful way. You'll see I did that in the transcript.
Republicans said the private interview under oath is designed to drill down on the FBI's actions during the 2016 election, when both campaigns were under federal investigation, including contacts between former top Justice Department official Bruce Orr and the man behind the infamous Trump dossier.
We learned from Bruce Orr that Christopher Steele had told him he was desperate to stop President Trump from being president. I want to know when James Comey knew that.
Democrats say the goal is to damage the special counsel and promise to shut down the House GOP investigation when they take over the majority in coming weeks.
It's a waste of time to start with. The entire purpose of this investigation is to get us discouraging in the real investigation, which is well.
Just 2 hours into the session, a senior committee Republican cried foul, claiming a government lawyer shut down key questions.
Director Comey is in there with two attorneys. I would say at his gleeful acceptance, instructed that he will not be answering a great many questions that are clearly items at the core of our investigations.
But House Democrats say little of note was learned from today's private session.
It's just been a wild goose chase. It's been a rerun of the same questions and answers through multiple interviews. I like TV reruns, but this is getting a little ridiculous.
Okay, on Comey, what reporters were told is that we do expect him back up here for another session of this transcribed under oath interview in about 2 weeks' time. And literally, since we've been on the air, there's been breaking news in the Manafort filing. We've just have an order filed by the judge in that case in Washington. Part of that filing that goes to the special counsel allegations that he violated his deal will be kept under seal, but it does appear that part of the filing will be public. We're trying to get onto the website, as you can anticipate. It's jammed with traffic, but as soon as we have new information, Brett, we'll bring that to you.
Okay, Catherine Herridge live on the Hill. Catherine, thanks. Just moments ago, we saw a tweet about 3 minutes ago from the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, at Real Donald J. Trump, totally clears the president. Thank you, exclamation point. Assume he's talking about all of this. Don't have any more detail on that, but that was the tweet that just came out. Let's dig into this filing, these filings, what we know, what we don't know. Let's get some analysis right now from George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley. Jonathan, I want to start with the Russia part of the special counsel filing and the breakdown, as Catherine mentioned, of these 4 ways Cohen helps. And we've got it in a bullet point here. It's new information that we didn't know, but what's your reading of that particular part?
Some of this we've known about, obviously. There was this Moscow project, which itself is not a crime. President Trump's been open about the fact that he was continuing as a businessman, as a backup plan if he didn't make the successful run for the White House. But there are some aspects of this that should be pretty worrisome for the White House. One of the things I thought was interesting that stood out, if you take these 4 areas where Cohen is found to have cooperated. 2 of them you could put under sort of collusion allegation categories, and 2 you could put under obstruction types of allegations. So they're about even there. But at one point they talk about how Cohen had a contact in Russia who said he had high-ranking connections, and that he promised, quote, campaign political synergy between the 2 governments. What's interesting about those 3 words, campaign political synergy, we haven't seen that before. The quote from Cohen is political synergy. The special counsel adds the word campaign, making it clear that, to me at least, this was not about the Moscow project. This was about the campaign and political synergy there. What is meant by those 3 words, I don't know. But as a criminal defense attorney, they really stood out to me, because that's the first link, as tenuous as it may be, that we've seen.
Now, the special counsel says that Cohen did cooperate. He started out not cooperating, but eventually he does in the special counsel filing. The U.S. attorney from the Southern District of New York says, you know what, we want substantial jail time because we don't think he came to the table with everything. In their filing on page 11, they get into this campaign finance question. That Cohen played a central role in 2 similar schemes to purchase the rights to stories, each from women who claim to have had an affair with individual one. This is Donald Trump. So as to suppress the stories and thereby prevent them from influencing the election. With respect to both payments, Cohen acted with the intent to influence the 2016 presidential election. Cohen coordinated his actions with 1 or more members of the campaign, including through meetings and phone calls about the fact, nature, and timing of the payments. In particular, and as Cohen himself has now admitted, with respect to both payments, he acted in coordination with and at the direction of individual one. As a result of Cohen's actions, neither woman spoke to the press prior to the election. Individual one, again, is Donald Trump.
Right.
The implications of that.
Well, it seems to me that this is directly implicating the president in a campaign finance violation. You can't possibly read this and conclude that this idea sort of sprang out of the head of Zeus for Michael Cohen. He was doing this certainly to benefit Donald Trump, but they suggest that he did this in coordination with Donald Trump.
And direction of.
And direction of. And they go on to say that this was an effort to influence the election from the shadows. So they're saying that these 2 individuals, including the President of the United States, tried to influence the election through the shadows. So what we know at a minimum is this is going to be part of that report going to Congress, and it's going to hit hard. I mean, it's clear that they're saying, they actually say Michael Cohen is credible now. You know, they list all of his lies, his history of deception and greed, but they say now we think he's telling the truth about this stuff. So this is going to be what we see in that part of the report that gets issued from the special counsel, and they are directly implicating the President of the United States. Now, federal election campaign violations are rarely criminal matters, but they can be a crime. The issue is not how serious is this crime to prosecute. The issue is the special counsel has come as close as you could get to accusing the president of a conspiracy to commit a crime. If the special counsel... You're
saying like an unindicted co-conspirator?
Yeah, I mean, it's everything but the name. You know, it's pretty hard to just to avoid that Donald Trump is all over this in the language picked by the prosecutors. Now, the problem is not that the crime itself is a huge one. The problem is that if the president engaged in any actions to conceal that crime,
and there's evidence of it,
right, then it becomes much more serious, because then you can have obstruction issues that are real ones. It's obstructing a crime. So the secondary crime could actually be more serious.
What the special counsel was told to do was to get to the bottom of Russia's interference in the 2016 election. In that Russia section, we see the beginnings, but we don't see all the puzzle pieces here.
Yeah, I think there's good news here as well, in the sense that, you know, the thing that caught my eye was that synergy conversation with some unknown Russian. But it also says that nothing came out of that. Cohen didn't even follow up on it because he was already working on the Moscow project. Now, it seems to me that you could argue that Cohen at least viewed this as all about the Moscow project. He had a line going on there, didn't even pick up the phone, essentially, to call back this guy. If there was real collusion in a criminal sense, some type of conspiracy, this sure doesn't look like it. You know, phone calls that aren't followed up, suggestions that these 2 individuals meet.
The other thing is laying the groundwork, it seems, for some kind of obstruction case. And that is, fourth, Cohen describes the circumstances of preparing and circulating his response to the congressional inquiries. In other words, getting that out to inside the White House.
Yeah, I think the thing to watch here, at least from my perspective, is that obstruction has largely been focused on the firing of Comey, which I've never believed was a serious obstruction case, because I just don't believe you could make out all the elements of obstruction there. But here you see emerging a separate basis for obstruction that the special counsel may be working on. This idea of federal election law violations, the payment to these women, and whether the president obstructed efforts or attempted to mislead on those points. So we may be seeing a sort of metastasized obstruction case here, which is spreading to other areas.
Right. And last thing here, this is really a case that eventually lands on the lap of the incoming House Democratic leadership. Do you believe that the special prosecutor, the special counsel, could subpoena the president? Do you think that there's a lot of legal questions there?
Well, judging from what's in these papers, if I was representing a client, I would expect a subpoena. But it changes because you have the President of the United States. Can he subpoena the president? I think he can. Could he win in that fight? Probably, but you need the runway to do it. If he's going to do it, he needs to get a report out, or he needs to get a subpoena out now, because he's going to be in the courts for a while.
Okay, stand by. Some breaking news. We just have received a heavily redacted filing on the Paul Manafort side of this investigation. Catherine Herridge back with us from Capitol Hill with that. Catherine?
Okay, so Bret, I'm still going through the document as we speak, but I want to draw your attention to sort of the back end of the document. It's heavily redacted. It's heavily redacted, and at around page 8, it gets to the substance of the allegation that he lied to members of the special counsel team, which was a violation of the plea agreement. It cites an episode in May of this year, a text message basically authorizing a third party to be in touch with the administration. And then it also cites an episode in February of this year that one of Manafort's work colleagues said that Manafort had claimed that he had been in touch with the administration. I don't know who that work colleague is, but I think you want to ask yourself whether it could have been Rick Gates. The only reason I mention that because, of course, Rick Gates is another individual who has admitted to lying in the course of this investigation, but he is now cooperating with the special counsel. I'm still going through the record, but those seem to be two of the foundational lies they say Manafort made, because after the plea agreement, the understanding was that he would no longer have that contact. But again, and I'm still looking through the record, that is a process crime. It's lying about his actions, but it's not going to the issue of contact with the Russians. I'm still reading through the records. Let me come back to you when I have more, but those are two things that jump out at me right there about violating the agreement.
Okay, Catherine, thank you. As we look at these documents just coming to us, you can see the redacted portions, and they're significant on some of these pages, much like you saw in the Michael Flynn filing. Back with Jonathan Turley, as we're sifting through this, it seems like some of the redacted parts are lying about the fact and frequency of connections with, we don't know, redacted, falsely told investigators about, and this electronic communications and travel records. So obviously the special counsel is making a case here that they can't trust Manafort, and they're going to go back and he told multiple discernible lies, it says. These were not instances of mere memory lapses. If the defendant contends the government has not acted in good faith, the government is available to prove the false statements at a hearing, saying they have the evidence to back it up.
Right. First of all, we know that Paul Manafort is not very discerning. You know, he was nailed even before trial on the phone, essentially trying to influence witnesses. And that was a particularly moronic act, since you have to know that your phone is being monitored at that stage when you're under home confinement. And it does sound like this it fulfills that pattern. They're suggesting that they have tapes and other proof that he directly lied. What I think is interesting about both these filings, though, is you have two individuals here, even Michael Cohen, who's clearly not giving the special counsel what he wants. And we've seen that with Corsi, we've seen that with Papadopoulos, that here you've got someone like Cohen over here who's cooperating across the board, but not enough. And the question is why? What is it that they want Cohen to say? And that, I think, fulfills the narrative of the White House, that Cohen is not exactly a discerning individual himself.
Well, in fact, the president has said he's a bold liar. He's tweeted that this guy lies all the time.
Yeah,
et cetera,
and
et cetera.
Cohen's about as discerning as a jukebox. You know, anyone that puts a quarter in, he'll play the tune. And so here you've got this guy who has a bad reputation for saying anything that will help him, but not saying enough to please the special counsel. Now, what is really clear here, well, the Cohen aspect, and this is too late for Paul Manafort, who's going to be ground into a fine pumice, but it's clear with Cohen that this is not the end. For Cohen. They're dangling out what's called a 5K 1.1 letter, which is basically a cooperation letter. And they come back repeatedly and say, you don't have that letter. And so what they're doing is essentially turning this into a canned hunt. They're going to hit him with a sentence. The only way he's out of that cage is if he tells them what they want to hear. But that actually is concerning to me, because here's a guy who's obviously cooperating fully. They say he's credible. So what else did they want him to say?
Right.
And when you look at where the narrative breaks down, you begin to get an idea, you know, where Cohen says, look, nothing happened out of this contact with the Russians.
Yeah.
You know, nothing went forward. And one suspects that that wasn't good enough.
The question is where we go from here and whether this tells us anything about the roadmap ahead. Whether these documents suggest that this is coming to a head and could lead to a Mueller report in coming days, or whether this tells us there's a lot more yet to go for Mueller and the Southern District of New York.
Well, you know, the good money was always on a report being issued by the end of the year for one reason only. Mueller doesn't want to wait to issue a report to the Democratic House. That makes it look particularly bad. It would be better to issue at least the collusion part of the report by the end of the year. It's not clear if that's going to happen. But what is clear out of here, and we've known this for a couple weeks now, is that they are trying to bag Donald Trump. I mean, I know that may sound like, oh, how naive that is, but most of us assumed that the trail, if any trail that was there, it was long, cold, and barely discernible. In the last few weeks, we've seen Mueller pressuring witness after witness specifically to create a clear shot to Trump. And so what's appearing, the delay here, is they're seeing if they can get that final puzzle piece. The question is what that is. We know Mueller hasn't gotten what he wanted. The question is, has he gotten enough?
In this filing on Manafort, there are multiple references to this guy, Konstantin Kilimnik.
Mm-hmm.
He was referred to repeatedly in Manafort's trial in Virginia. Prosecutors said Kilimnik was basically based in Cyprus, also known as Dr. K, and helped Manafort complete what they said was his illegal financial transactions for many of shell companies in Cyprus. And they say that he lied about the fact and the frequency of his interactions with this guy. What we don't see is how this Kilimnik fits into a broader piece in right. a bigger puzzle.
No, this is a wonderfully colorful figure, including the common reference of Dr. K. It's something of 007, you know, in Cyprus, right? But every time we get to Dr. K, everything's blacked out, which indicates that there's ongoing investigations and possibly information they don't want Cohen to see. Because Cohen is in the dark here. You know, when you go for a proffer, when you go for immunity, you're given what's called a queen for a day. It seems like, according to these filings, he got a queen for 7 days, where he sat down at least 7 times to proffer what he knows. That's exposing you, by the way. People misunderstand that. Those statements can be used against you to some degree. Clearly in those meetings, he gave them a lot, which they're sort of begrudgingly acknowledging here. Not enough from the perspective of the New York prosecutors. And that's sort of interesting in itself, by the way, because the New York prosecutors are really the boots on the ground in terms of his crimes. They look very closely at Cohen, and they clearly don't like him, and they want him in jail for a significant period of time.
These prosecutors, both the special counsel's office and the Southern District of New York, are really putting the screws to these guys. And what I can't determine is whether they're getting what they're looking for? And is it painting this picture?
Well, they're clearly not, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
and so in the big picture, doesn't that seem like, if you're on the Trump team, you look at this and say, I mean, there's some here that we're concerned about, obviously.
Yeah, they should be concerned.
But is the big shoe dropping in these documents?
No, I think that actually there are positive aspects to this. Each of the tantalizing aspects about Russian contacts seem to die on the vine and go nowhere. So this is a sort of a speaking filing, and it doesn't say much about anything other than preliminary conversations and some frustration, obviously, that Cohen is not giving them more. So the question, I think, on a lot of people's minds is going to be, with this level of cooperation, what was the missing detail here for Cohen? Because he seems to have dropped the dime on everyone, but he didn't do enough. Now, as for Manafort, you know, he's gone. Now, the question is an intriguing one, whether Mueller played Manafort or whether Manafort played Mueller. I mean, because Mueller got a lot of information, but Manafort stopped that second trial from occurring, pled to 10 counts. He would have been convicted of more than that, cooperated so he can argue that to the judge, and still is making a play for a pardon.
Yeah, and that's a real question. And the president has said that it's still on the table about a pardon for Manafort. Speaking of which, the president, as we mentioned earlier, putting out that tweet saying it's totally cleared the president. Thank you, exclamation point, for reaction. And I guess that's all we're getting so far. John Roberts joins us from the North Lawn. John?
There has not been much reaction from the president other than that tweet that you mentioned. Let's put it up on the screen so that everybody can read along. The president tweeted it 20 minutes ago. Just says simply, totally clears the president. Thank you. We assume that he was talking about the Michael Cohen sentencing memoranda from the Southern District of New York, as well as the special counsel's office, because at that point, that would have been all he had an opportunity to read, because the Manafort documents didn't come in until after, or, you know, right about the same time that the president sent out that tweet. And I doubt if he had an opportunity to read them, though perhaps he did. But couple of the things that we can glean from the Manafort memos that I found particularly interesting is that he met 12 times with prosecutors and investigators from the FBI. 2 of those times were before the plea agreement, or 3 of those times, rather, were before the plea agreement. He also met on 2 occasions with the grand jury. I think what's important to note here is that we've got the 7 pages of the sentencing memorandum from the Office of the Special Counsel. What we don't have, and there are a lot of redactions in that, but part of this is under seal for the reason that they did not want information out there about, quote, pending investigations and uncharged individuals. So that might give you some idea, if you read the legal tea leaves, and there are the investigatory tea leaves, that there are other investigations underway that could involve other individuals who may face charges. Might be a leap to say that the people will definitely face charges, but uncharged individuals might give you that assumption. Again, what Catherine Herridge said was interesting, that Manafort had contacts with somebody in the administration, and we don't know if that was in the White House or if it was in one of the other departments, all the way up until February of 2018, and then authorized another individual to have contacts with somebody in the administration as recently as May of 2018. And then back to the Office of Special Counsel memo about Michael Cohen. And I know that you found this word interesting because I heard you mention it on the 5, Brett, this idea that whoever Michael Cohen was talking to in the Russian Federation was talking about the potential for, quote, political synergy. And what exactly does that mean? The president and his attorneys all along, all throughout this, have denied that there was any collusion. So far, there doesn't appear to have been any evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russian individuals to influence the American election. But this idea of political synergy is a curious one, and I would love to know what they're talking about in that. Brett?
There's a lot of things we'd like to know what they're talking about. John, really quickly, there's new legal staff at the White House, a new White House counsel. There's questions whether they're staffed up to be able to handle what may be coming down the track here, not only with the special counsel and the Southern District of New York, but also from the House Democrats.
Yeah, right now they're kind of down a body during the bulk of the Mueller investigation. You had Don McGahn as the White House counsel, and then you had Ty Cobb, who was an in-house counsel who was assigned specifically to the Mueller investigation, but he was really involved with production of a lot of documents. So there was a lot of heavy lifting in the early stages of the Mueller investigation. Ty Cobb left and was replaced by Emmett Flood, who is now taken over as the interim White House counsel. But he doesn't have the same degree of heavy lifting with document production that Ty Cobb did. And Pat Cipollone will be coming in very soon as the White House counsel. And Emmett Flood will either depart or he'll go back to the job that he had after Ty Cobb left, which is looking after the Mueller investigation. But you're right, there's potentially a lot coming down the tracks here. And then when you consider all of the investigations that are going to be launched up on Capitol Hill when the Democrats take over the House, the counsel's office here at the White House is going to be a very, very busy place to be, Brett.
All right, John, we'll head back as news warrants. Let's go back to Catherine Herridge, who's been digesting the Manafort filing. She's up on Capitol Hill. Catherine.
Right. Just an observation about the timeline, and perhaps Professor Turley could weigh in as well. When we got the notice from the judge that there was an order, the judge said that there were two documents. One would be completely under seal, so not public, and the second would be public, but with these heavy redactions. If you actually look at the dates in the public document with redactions, what you see is everything is in this post-election period, post-administration period, post-guilty plea from Manafort. So largely 2018 allegations of witness tampering, as well as contact with the administration, sometimes directly or through a third party, which they say violated the agreement. I think it's worth considering whether the document that is under seal actually relates to what I would call the core time frame on these allegations of collusion, which is the campaign period and then this transition period. I know through my own reporting that the special counsel had been pressing Paul Manafort very hard on the Trump Tower meeting in June of 2016. You recall the Russians tried to get the meeting, offering sort of dirt on Hillary Clinton, but the real objective was to try and get these sanctions repealed, the Magnitsky Act. And even if you recall, Jared Kushner, I believe, testified that he had his assistant send an email to him so he'd have an excuse to get out of the meeting. He felt it was such a wash. And my contacts also report that Manafort has been heavily pressured on the WikiLeaks issue. Their argument is that their client has not lied and that the special counsel is seeking information either that he does not have or they do not believe exists. So the public hearing shortly, I think later this month or in January, will allow both sides to make the argument as to whether Manafort has broken the agreement or whether the special counsel, as other witnesses have alleged, have been using strong-arm tactics to obtain information that they don't have or they say is false information they simply will not provide, Brett.
Okay, Catherine, thank you. Looking at these documents, Jonathan Turley, there's this one section on page 9 when it comes to Manafort that they suggest that he has lied about his contacts with the administration. Catherine referenced it there, but it says the evidence demonstrates that Manafort had contacts with the administration, a text exchange in May, authorizes a person to speak with an administration official on his behalf. Separately, according to another Manafort colleague, Manafort said in February 2018 that Manafort had been in communication with a senior administration official. February 2018. Up through February 2018. A review of documents recovered from a search of Manafort's electronic documents demonstrates additional contacts with administration officials. So they say they have the juice to
yeah,
say
and
he made the contact.
Much of the Manafort material should not really present a threat to the White House. I mean, look, Manafort was like a perpetual motion machine of criminal conduct. I mean, he was committing crimes all over the globe. And a lot of this goes to those transactions, those dealings totally unrelated to the Trump campaign or the White House. It's that section that you just referenced, which is a serious problem. We already know that there is this defense agreement that existed and was continued to be used between Manafort and the White House after his plea. That's exceptionally rare. I mean,
of course, he had one too, or has one.
That's right. But Manafort was a cooperating witness meeting with prosecutors, and according to reports, his counsel was relaying what the prosecutors were asking him about. Now, this goes one step step further, and this is suggesting direct contacts approved by Manafort to speak with members of the administration. This is where it gets sporty if you dig deeper. That is, Mueller could be trying to develop a serious obstruction case here. Manafort was a cooperating witness with the special counsel. If there was any agreements going back and forth about his curtailing information, withholding information, that would be on all fours an obstruction case. That would be, no one would doubt that as a definition. Now, here's the problem. There's a crime-fraud exception to privilege arguments. If Mueller argues that what they were doing was using that defense agreement or other types of communications to undermine his investigation, a judge could strip them of privilege, and you could have a bunch of attorneys being put on the stand.
Which is fascinating, because there's not only Manafort and possibly mining information and giving it back to administration officials, but in the beginning of the filing on Cohen, it says that he voluntarily comes into the special counsel, and they determined, based on the evidence that they had, that he was lying. And then eventually he turns, realizes how much hot water he's in, and starts telling the truth.
Well, actually, the one part that I could imagine Michael Flynn must be grinding his teeth in reading was a footnote where he says, they say, well, basically Cohen came in and just lied all over the place. And then he came back to federal investigators, and then he just corrected it. And you could see Michael Flynn reading this going, okay, well,
what happened to me?
What happened to me? And they just basically brushed it off, said, well, he came back and he basically said sorry and corrected it. So there's a real disconnect in terms of how Mueller is treating false statements.
The other footnote mentions Cohen talking to individual one, which we've established is Donald Trump, numerous times about setting up a meeting with the president of Russia. Now, this is all before, we're in the heat of the campaign, and he's saying we don't have any contact. Should that matter in all of this, in the pretext of what becomes this controversy with Russia?
Yeah, as worried as I am about aspects of this, I still think that the White House narrative is holding, in that if you take all of these meetings, including the Trump Tower meeting, all these contacts with the Russians, they go nowhere. I mean, they say, well, will you meet us? We'll give you dirt on Hillary Clinton. And it just basically fizzles out in 15 minutes. Michael Cohen gets a call saying, we've got synergy that we're offering politically, and he doesn't even follow up on it. And so at each of these critical, very suspicious moments, they don't really amount to anything. And
so of the mountain of paper we've just digested for the past 32 minutes, what's the most troubling thing in these documents to you, if you're the Trump administration?
For Manafort, I would be definitely looking at that last part of the filing where they talk about direct contacts approved or even made by Manafort to the White House. That could be a serious obstruction claim. For Cohen, I would be most concerned about the fact that they keep on saying you don't have a 5K 1.1 letter. In other words, you're going nowhere for 5 years, maybe 4, unless you get that letter. And so this is not
Explain that.
Well, because what happened is that they said Cohen declined to be a cooperating witness. Cohen wouldn't decline to be a cooperating witness. He obviously wasn't giving them what they said was a condition of being a cooperating witness. So they're going to hit him with a major sentence. At that point, he can still come back and say, you know what, I've reconsidered. I need a cooperating agreement. And the prosecutors can come and ask for a reduction of sentence. And I think a lot of what this filing says is that letter is in our computer. We just have to type a name on it.
Yeah. Thank you, Jonathan. Stick around if you would. Be a part of the panel. This is real-time digesting court documents, live on air. Thank you. Also today, the first person sent to prison in the Russia investigation has been released. Former Trump campaign foreign policy advisor George Papadopoulos was sentenced to 14 days after pleading guilty, lying to the FBI about his contacts with Russian intermediaries. Mueller's team recommended incarceration for Papadopoulos because they said he begrudged his cooperation and his lies harmed their probe. Back at the White House, the president cluing us in on his new picks for some very important jobs. He has some extremely harsh words for a former associate tonight, somebody who worked for him. We're back with Chief White House correspondent John Roberts with the rest of the interesting day of news. Good evening, John.
Always seems like every day is an interesting day here at 1600 Pennsylvania. The president, when he was leaving this morning, was very excited to talk about some new additions to his cabinet and staff. But what really had his dandruff up today was a former top official. It was another first, an American president publicly unloading on his former Secretary of State. In a tweet, President Trump calling Rex Tillerson, quote, dumb as a rock. It was a forum at the MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston last night that sparked the outrage. Low-key until now, Tillerson let it be known what he thought of the president.
We did not have a common value system. When the president would say, well, here's what I want to do, and here's how I want to do it. And I'd have to say to him, well, Mr. President, I understand what you want to do, but you can't do it that way. It violates the law.
President Trump responded viciously to Tillerson's remarks, tweeting this afternoon, Rex Tillerson didn't have the mental capacity needed. I couldn't get rid of him fast enough. He was lazy as hell. Now it's a whole new ballgame. Great spirit at stake. The president is also looking for a new ballgame at the Department of Justice, today nominating William Barr to replace Jeff Sessions.
Bill previously led the Justice Department with distinction as Attorney General under George H.W. Bush, following his unanimous confirmation by the United States Senate. There's no one more capable or more qualified for this role. He deserves overwhelming bipartisan support.
In his first go-around as Bush 41's Attorney General, Barr did command overwhelming bipartisan support. He was unanimously confirmed. But today in a statement, Senator Chuck Schumer said Barr has a big hill to climb in his confirmation and tied it to the Mueller investigation, saying Barr must commit first that the special counsel's investigation will proceed unimpeded, and second, that the special counsel's final report will be made available to Congress and the public immediately upon completion. Nancy Pelosi took a wrecking ball to bipartisanship in a statement saying, this nomination is the latest in the president's pattern of installing partisan hacks in the highest reaches of our government who will happily do his bidding. President Trump also announced his long-expected replacement for UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, State Department spokeswoman and former Fox News host Heather Nauert.
She's very talented, very smart, very quick, and I think she's going to be respected by all. So Heather Nauert will be nominated for the ambassador to the United Nations.
But Democrats will have the long knives out for her confirmation. The Center for American Progress leading the way in a statement today saying to nominate someone with zero diplomatic negotiating experience is yet another reminder that the Trump administration does not prioritize diplomacy. But Nauert got a full measure of support from Senator Lindsey Graham, who said she is a fine and capable person. I'm sure she will perform well at her hearing and look forward to supporting her nomination. And President Trump has another announcement to make tomorrow. He will name the current Army Chief of Staff, Mark Milley, to succeed the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joe Dunford. That announcement will be made tomorrow at the Army-Navy football game, but will not be effective until October 1st of 2019. So the president really getting out ahead of this one, Brett.
John Roberts for the second time from the North Lawn. John, thanks.
Thank you.
Over on Wall Street today, another brutal day for investors. The Dow sank 559 today, wiping out the gains for the year. The S&P 500 lost 63. The Nasdaq was off 219. For the week, the Dow fell 4.5 percentage points. The S&P 500 lost 4.6. The Nasdaq dropped almost 5. Today's trading comes on the heels of another solid jobs report, but not as good as predicted. Susan Lee of the Fox Business Network joins us now from New York. Good evening, Susan.
Good evening, Brett. A slower pace of hiring in November, but still the best jobs market in close to 50 years. 155,000 jobs were created in the month of November, less than economists forecast, but still the jobless rate held at 3.7%, matching its lowest since 1969. Wage growth stayed at the highest in close to a decade, rising over 3% from a year ago. So where were the jobs? Healthcare, manufacturing, touted by the U.S. president, still advancing at twice last year's pace. Transportation and warehousing, along with professional and business services, hiring the most in the month. U.S. payrolls have now gained for over 8 years, and that's the longest steady stretch of job creation on record. A bright spot in an economy that's still forecast to be the best year of economic growth since 2005, when the U.S. last grew at over 3%. A rate of growth that economic advisor Larry Kudlow is forecasting for next year as well.
The economy is now in a 3% plus trajectory. We're going to get 3% growth next year. We're going to get 3%. I actually believe we will get 3% growth next year.
Now, the markets weren't exactly buying into the optimism on Friday with another big points drop for the Dow. Its worst three-day sell-off in close to a year. U.S.-China trade concerns also hit investor sentiment this week with the arrest of a top executive at China's largest network equipment maker, Huawei, straining a U.S.-China trade truce. Brett?
Susan Lee in New York. Susan, thanks. As Susan mentioned, U.S. prosecutors telling the Supreme Court of British Columbia earlier today that Chinese telecom executive is guilty of violating international sanctions against Iran. Huawei chief financial officer Meng Wanzhou now faces up to 30 years in prison. This plays out as the U.S. and China battle over the future of telecoms and obviously their trade relationship. We will talk more about the special counsel investigation, what we're learning from all these filings tonight, and the House inquiry into that alleged anti-Trump bias at the Justice Department. The panel, including Jonathan Turley, is next. But first, this tweet from the security detail of the late President George H.W. Bush. That detail disbanded as of this morning, following yesterday's burial in Texas. Timberwolf was the president's Secret Service code name for more than 40 years. Former President Bush joined the Navy upon turning 18 years old, just a few months after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor.